Hey, everybody. Hope and pray that you're doing well today. Continuing our look this week at the independent attitudes that get us into trouble. And we've talked about wisdom, talked about our own solutions, we've talked about even under our own power. But today we're going to talk about our own desires, and just kind of going through scripture, right? We've been in Genesis twice and then in Judges. And now today we're going to be in Second Samuel, and a very familiar passage to most of you, I'm sure, is the story of David and Bathsheba. But we're really just going to look at the first five verses, and then we'll talk about some things. So let's jump right in. 2 Samuel chapter 11, starting in verse 1. Then it happened in the spring, at the time when the kings go out to battle, that David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel, and they destroyed the sons of Ammon and besieged Rabbah. But David stayed at Jerusalem. That's important for the context of our story. Verse 2. Now when evening came, David arose from his bed and walked around on the roof of the king's house, and from the roof he saw a woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful in appearance. So David sent and inquired about the woman. And one said, Is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? David sent messengers and took her, and when she came to him, he lay with her. And when she had purified herself from her uncleanness, she returned to her house. The woman conceived, and she sent and told David and said, I am pregnant. Now, we're just going to stop right there, because the rest of the story, if you don't know it, is as you follow throughout the passage, is that, well, then David schemes to come up with this plan that Uriah, her husband, he's going to bring him home from battle. And of course, he'll do what most husbands would do, right? You've been away from your wife for a while, you come home, and then that would cover up the sin, right? Of course, then he'd think it's his child. But Uriah is a better soldier than David is, and he comes home and he realizes that, look, all my fellow soldiers are out here, and none of them get to be with their families, so I'm going to lay out here by the king's house, and I'm going to stay there instead of going home with my wife. And so David realizes that, well, his plan didn't work, so ultimately he ends up sending Uriah back into battle with a note in his hand that basically says, put me on the front lines, but he doesn't even know what the note is. It is basically signifying and sentencing him to death, because he's going to get up there, all the other troops are going to back up, and he is going to be killed. And even though David wasn't the one that specifically put hands on him to kill him, David was the murderer. Just plain and simple, he was a murderer. And all this was to cover up a sin. And we could go on and how that plays out later, but you just follow there in 2 Samuel and see how the Lord lays all that out for us. But the thing that I want us to talk about today is, our own desires. Now, here's the issue, right? David already had like a whole harem of wives and these women all around. And it kind of falls into society today is, and I was even reading as one commentator noted that, it's in our society, we think that, well, if you'll just satisfy that urge, that desire, then it'll be satisfied and it'll be put away. But the problem is that it grows, right? I mean, we see this with pornography, and we think, okay, well, society will say, well, just a little bit, and that'll make them feel better. But the problem is it just grows, and you got to have more, and you got to have more. It's the same thing with alcohol, right? It's just, oh, well, just a little bit, and that'll be okay. But it's just, what it does is it makes you want a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And see, this is where we want to say to God that we know what our desires are. Right now, let's understand that this desire that he has for a woman was put there by God, a desire for one wife. That's a desire. That's a God-given desire. See, within the confines of a marriage, it's a godly desire. Outside of marriage, it's not. Now, see, that's where we have to be in control. We have to have some self-control, and we have to allow God to have control over those areas of our lives. But when we decide that, no, I have control over my own desires, that's when we fall into problems. And that's when we have that independent attitude of knowing what I desire, and I can handle this on my own. That's what gets us into trouble. But I can't look at this. I know our pastor years ago had pointed this out, and it's just stuck with me. And you can't read this passage without noticing in verse 1 that it says twice that at a time when kings go out to war, right? David was doing this, and then it says, but David stayed at Jerusalem. So when everybody else, when all kings should be at war, David stayed home. So even in this, his desire was to be lazy, right? For whatever reason, and I mean, the scripture doesn't really tell us why, but he should have been out at war. It was enough. There was enough going on that under divine inspiration, they recorded that David stayed at home when all the other kings went out to war. So this even tells me that that spiritually there was something going on that he already was not doing as he should have done. And see, that's the moments when we let our guard down, when we think, well, it's just this one time. And we see what this one time did. Because all that scripture records is a one night stand with Bathsheba, and then she ends up pregnant. And what scripture is basically telling us is that, look, she was clean. She was from her menstrual cycle, that she was pure from that. And then they had a night together, and then she goes back home. So it was saying that there's no way Uriah was ever the father. So that David let his desires, right? He saw her, and some will try to shift the blame to Bathsheba and say, well, she shouldn't have been bathing out there in the wide open so everybody could see. And maybe she was at fault, but scripture doesn't tell us that, doesn't lean us that way. It points us more to the fact that, if nothing else, David should have known better. That David should have had control over his desires. And also it says that he took her. So he could have done this a forcefully way that she really didn't have hardly any choice to come. But to think about it, that's all kind of, I guess, kind of a side note. But the point is that when he saw her, he should have stopped looking. He should have stopped lusting. He should have stopped, right? He had so many opportunities, right? He saw her, he could have turned around and went the other way. He could, I shouldn't have seen that. But no, he saw it and he liked it, and he looked and looked and looked enough till he looked so long that that look became a desire that he wanted to have. And so then he sent for her. But then, and he was inquiring about her, and even when somebody else pointed out, well, wait a minute, isn't this Uriah's wife? That should have been another red flag. Should have stopped and said, no, I can't do that. I can't do that. But no, he thought he could do best by his own desires. And he ends up paying for it. In the long run, Uriah pays for it. Bathsheba pays for the sin as well. They have a death of a child. And there comes a time when David realizes and understands all this, and understands the sin that was created because of his desire. But as we're talking about this week, I just wanted to kind of to interject this thought into your thought process today. And really this whole week is, and what do your desires look like? Are your desires, are they, the God-given desires that he has for you? Are you using them in the right way? I mean, like I said, the desire that he had for a woman, but it was to be for his one wife, that's a God-given desire within the confines of marriage. But he used it in a sinful way. So are you using the desires that God has given you, whatever it may be, in a godly way? Or are you trying to be so independent? Are you trying to do everything on your own, relying on your own strength to hold back those desires? Or are you really focusing and letting God do what he wants to do in your life? So today I'm just encouraging you, don't be dependent on yourself. Right? Let's not have that independent attitude, but let's be dependent on the Lord for everything. Amen. I pray that this has been a blessing and encouragement to you, and I pray that you have a great, great day.